Good morning, eighth graders, I guess, or good afternoon, depending on when you see this. Today marks day 2 of our video lessons. And so we're going to go over today's agenda and then we're going to get right to it. We're actually going to be utilizing our mentor text packet. So if you do not have this, pause the video, go grab a mentor text packet. You should have one. We passed them out at the start of class today. So you've just finished Lexia in our Thou Shalt Not Complain Thursday. And we're going to go ahead and move forward with our lesson. So today we are going to focus on looking at author's voice. One thing that we want to see come through in your video, or not videos, your writing. But before we can do that, we should look at some authors who are doing it well and authors who utilize structure and voice. So it's one of those things where we want to mine these mentor texts and then maybe do some mimicking. So it's okay to steal from the best as long as you make it your own. And so then as you move through workshop, you'll have one text that you'll read on your own and annotate, and then you will be able to go back in and do some editing of your writing that you worked on yesterday. So a lot of you got pretty far in your draft. So if you look at our learning target here, I'm just circling it with my mouse, you will examine expert memoir writing and mimic those moves, focusing especially on voice. And again, we'll also talk about structure. So go ahead and turn. It's towards the back of your packet. You're going to be looking for a text titled Husband. It's in the section that is from the Encyclopedia of an Extraordinary Life by Amy Rosenthal. So these are going to be our anchor texts today that we look at. And so these are the 3 that we'll look at together. So I'm going to go ahead and show you my text here. There we go. So I'm going to be reading from right here. So pause the video so that you can follow along with me. And I want to see you annotating. If you notice, one thing I'm going to notice right away before I even start reading is the idea of structure. And so I'm going to jot this down on a sticky note. I like to use sticky notes when I annotate. She's kind of breaking that rule where we say it shouldn't all just be one big paragraph, right? So I'm noticing that it's just this like large block paragraph. And I'm wondering what influence that has on her voice, because structure and voice oftentimes go hand in hand. So I'm just going to read right here, and I want you to follow along with me. So it says, Jason and I were fixed up on a blind date. My dad's best friend, John. By my dad's best friend, John. When I opened my front door and saw him, I knew there was something between us. By the end of our Merlot and rigatoni, I knew he was the one. So I'm going to pause there. I'm going to underline this section right here where it says, the end of our Merlot and rigatoni. She could have just said dinner, right? But instead, she really focused on that specific moment because it's a memory that sticks out to her. She remembers exactly what they were eating because this is her husband, right? It was their first date. And so it's the moment that her life changed, right? It set her on a completely different path. And it also says a little bit about her and how like she is going to be specific in this moment. 52 weeks later, he knew, right? 52 weeks is a year. She could have said a year. So ask yourself, like, why would she say 52 weeks instead? I think 52 weeks sounds a lot longer than a year. It's a different measure of time. And so, again, I ask a lot of questions as I'm reading. And so to me, this idea of, right, so she knew after one date, right? One dinner, it took him a year to figure it out as well. And so I think that's really interesting. And again, she says 52 weeks here. And so now we start to see, she's going to start talking about all the reasons she likes him. I like how when his sister, Michelle, phones him, he just answers yep or uh-huh. And then she either talks and he occasionally goes, alrighty then, or more characteristically says nothing at all. I like how they always call each other during exciting TV events like the Grammys or the Sopranos season finale or some Freeview Prince concert on satellite and just sit on the phone together in total silence, sharing the show from their respective city posts. I like that he's had the same best friend since he was 3. Hi, Dave. So one thing I'm noticing, she says, I like, and then she even gives a shout out to someone. So she's talking directly to the reader. If you'll notice this idea now of repetition, and this is indicative of her voice. This is something that I've mentioned a little bit in my own writing that I do. And so that is unique to her, right? And it's okay to employ that. You can see like it goes into this idea that, right, she really loves her husband. She's going to list all the reasons why she likes him. We'll keep going, right? I like that he's a good dancer and a surprisingly good jacks player. I like how he barely ever annoys me. I like how we dine at restaurants, either on stools at the bar instead of waiting an hour and a half for a table, or if we do sit at a table, we'll sit next to each other instead of across. And this was a run-on sentence, right? We talked about how you can break the rules a little bit. As long as you know the rules, you can break the rules. And if it's intentional. So she's, again, we talk about structure, big block paragraph, run-on sentences. Any other place, right? She would get dinged for this and it would be like, oh, terrible writer. But for this, it's intentional. She's trying to kind of show her train of thought when it comes to her husband, because sometimes love doesn't make sense, right? And so she is just listing all of the things that she loves about him. And it's almost just like this word vomit that she has to get out. I like how when he's making toast, thoughtful, composed, handsome, like a real gentleman. I like how he laughs when he laughs really hard, like during the Will Ferrell streaking scene in Old School. I like how he's forgiving when I shut down and retreat inward. I like how he doesn't give me a hard time about my heap of clothes in the closet, that we both know I have less tolerance for his harmless scattered piles. I like how he doesn't make me feel bad about my lack of enthusiasm for important adult things like politics and Quicken. I like that I don't mind how he smells when he sweats. I like that when we fight, he tends to have a point and he makes it skillfully and convincingly. I like how he holds a skillet. I like his hands. They fit good in mine. Right? So this becomes completely, the structure changes right here with this first and it's just a list now. So if we notice, it becomes a list, and not in a bulleted pointed list that we normally see in our notebooks, but a list of sentences for all the reasons that she cares about him. And so we get to know a little bit about her. And I really love this last line. I like how he holds a skillet. I like his hands, they fit good with mine. And you can see that there's just love in this, like the tone in which she's writing. It's somewhat comical and silly, and she's talking to the reader. And then it starts to get more serious down here when she talks about how they fight. And so you can see the shift in her voice and in her tone when she's talking about her husband, right? So take a second and think are some ways that you could mimic the way that she's writing. And maybe this isn't your cup of tea, but you could use some repetition. You could also play with structure. You could think about listing things. That would work too, right? You could think about word choice. Instead of saying dinner, you could say what you ate. Instead of saying the number of years, you could say the number of weeks, right? So it's just, you could play on those things because they all mean the same thing, but the impact on the reader is different, right? It makes you kind of pause and think. So the next text we look at is called Kitchen Table. So if you'll move just a few pages up in the packet, it's just a few pages ahead of time. Pause this video if you need to get to this. And so we'll notice one thing already, that this is a poem. So the structure we know is going to be different. So it says, the table stands where the green table stood, where they played Scrabble with the Babbages, wrote out statements for New Way cleaners, where Mother made out rolls and we sculpted Christmas candles, and she tightened the vise on the cast iron grinder that turned ham scraps into ham salad. That's her first sentence, right? And so one thing I want to ask myself is, I'm going to keep this idea in mind because it's called Kitchen Table. And I'm going to think to myself, what else does this represent? We're not going to touch a ton on symbolism today, but this is a great one for symbolism. But again, we're seeing a run-on sentence. We're seeing lots of commas and really specific moments at this kitchen table, right? This table where she made calls for the March of Dimes and for the chamber, where she said I was treating her like a child, where I said I was only trying to take care of her. This table stands where the white enamel table stood on which she mixed the formula for our bottles. Before the table, we antiqued that got carried away by the flood. This table is where she opened the newspaper to Daddy's photo. Harlan businessman, dead at 68. Right? So now if we think about this section here, if you think about the tone and the author's voice, right, this is pretty somber. Right? She's talking about her mother and her getting in fights. She's talking about this where she calls her mother a child, and she's saying, I'm just trying to take care of you. She talks about a flood that damaged their home. I'm going to guess if it swept away a table, it definitely damaged their home, right? And then she talks about her father's death. And so this table represents so many things in their life, right? A table is a place of gathering, a place of communion, a place of community. And so when you sit around a table, you're not just eating, you're not just breaking bread, right? It's a communication tool. You're sitting talking to people, whether you're actually saying anything or not, right? When you sit around a table, there's a level of communication that happens. And then she goes on to say this is where she sat down and howled, right? In conjunction with what happened to her father. And then it goes on to say, and this is the end. And so I don't have to worry about this part. And so this whole section here of this poem, or this whole section of this book, because it is a book of poems, right? If you look at the way the sentences move, they can be run on, but the lines are really short, right? So it gets us to move quickly. So that's a utilization of voice in the sense that she wants us to kind of tumble through this, right? If this sentence were like listed all the way across, we would pause and then move to the next one. But by not ending with a period and making us go into the next sentence or next line with the same sentence, you can kind of feel a cadence begin where it says the table stands, where the green table stood, where they played Scrabble, with the Babbages, wrote out statements for New Way Cleaners, where mother made out rolls and we sculpted Christmas candles, and she tightened the vise on the cast iron grinder that turned ham scraps into ham salad. You can see that it almost just kind of builds, and it's like this little wave that's cresting. And so that's a tool that writers use to get the reader to kind of create that cadence in their head. And so that becomes voice, right? So it's your voice in your head, but it's their voice written down. Poems are a wonderful option. If you wanted to include in a portion of your story, of your memoir, I wouldn't say this should be all of them, or you would maybe want to do a collection like this. If you're interested in doing poetry, come see me, come talk to me, and we could potentially talk about that as one of our future memoirs. Right now, I'd like us to stay in stories, but you could play with this structure a little bit if you wanted to. And then the last one that I want to talk about is Home by Michael J. Rosen. So this is just kind of towards the middle of our packet. So go ahead and pause the video and find that. So it says, we'll go ahead and get started. Home by Michael J. Rosen. Home is what you take away each time you leave the house, like a wristwatch. It ticks beside the ticking that is your heart. Whether or not you hear it, look at its face, or feel its hold, we're with you, is what the minute, hour, and second hands of home have to tell, right? So I've read a first paragraph here. I'm noticing italics, right? That gets us into the reader's mind a little bit sometimes. That's inner monologue. Whereas this is like he's giving the watch kind of this idea of, the wristwatch and the house, human-like qualities. And if you'll notice, it's a really short memoir. It's broken into just three or four paragraphs. And then it says, home is the place that goes where you go, yet it welcomes you upon your return, like a dog overjoyed at the door. We've missed you, is what the chorus in your house sings. So there's lots of metaphors here. Metaphors and similes. And so if we think about this comparison of what home is, and you'll notice here, each paragraph starts with the same word, right? For the most part, there's and here. But again, this is a structure choice. This is a voice choice. It's repetition. Repetition is a big literary technique utilized by writers, right? And home is all the names that you know, the one and only person who does just what you do. Home is all the words that call you in for dinner, over to help, into hug, and out of a dream. He's talking about a person here, right? That home isn't just a home, right? So we're supposed to take from this that a home is not necessarily a building, right? Home is what you take away each time you leave the house. So your house is not your home. It's that feeling that you get about what happens in that house, or that feeling of safety, right? And so it says, come in, wherever you've been. This is the poem in which you are a part. This is the home that knows you by heart. And so Michael J. Rosen is doing what you could do right here, where he mixes two different structural choices. It's regular paragraphs, right? Kind of like the normal writing style, and then also kind of a short little poem here. And so we'll notice it's also in italics. And so, right? These are just three different ways or three different authors who are utilizing their voice to tell a story, right? To tell us about who they are. Because this tells us that Michael J. Rosen is defined by, not defined by, but part of who he is where he grew up and what he takes with him when he leaves the house, right? It's that feeling of warmth, safety. And so when you go out today, your goal is to be mimicking those things. So if we switch back over to our slideshow, right, we've taken some time, right? What does the author do to show their unique voice? We talked about that. How does the structure of the piece add to the author's meaning and message? We talked about that. And be thinking about what moves can you mimic? And mimic is just kind of a fancy word for how can you kind of do a similar thing in your own writing. You don't want to copy, but you can potentially mimic or emulate or try out some of the techniques that we talked about today. Your homework is to go into Mr. Entwistle. It's right at the beginning. It's right here. And by Jean Little. And I want you to do exactly what we just did together. And I want you to do that on your own. You can do that at the first part of workshop, or you can do this as homework at the end. Or if you don't get finished, you should be taking it home. As we move through workshop time, your options are to continue to develop the piece you selected yesterday, or you could flash draft a new scene or new piece based on your annotations. If you're like, oh gosh, I have some really great ideas now that I've seen what voice is, and I want to try something new. But today you are committing to your first draft because we're going to start typing tomorrow. And so as you develop your piece, right, you're going to pull those voice and structure examples and go back into those texts. If you need to, like this is your friend, go back in and look at what we did together, and then you can mimic that. I would say then after 25 or 30 minutes, you might want to start thinking about what your notebook check number 1 looks like, right? And so that's the process pages, annotations, drafting where you're starting to develop your own voice, and then your working theme, which we've talked about a little bit, and we'll talk a little bit more about tomorrow. If you have any questions, as always, raise your hand. But as of right now, your job is to go ahead and get to work. All right, have a great day.